Get up.
Okay, looks like we are live. So welcome everyone. Um, Sorry for the confusion about the dates and everything. I don't know how any of this works. Listen. I'm barely keeping up with my personal life right now. I can't. I can't barely keep up with anything else right now, which is fine. You know. Um, it's good to see everyone. If you're new, please, if you're new, go ahead and introduce yourself. But if you are new, yeah, of course you don't have to introduce yourself. But if you're new, this is our Monday night medicine Buddha practice. It's a guided practice. You don't need anything in particular. Even though I did write a text for Medicine Buddha, which you'll find on the website. And that's, you can follow that. It's also a recording to that takes you through the practice as well. But in our practice, we just kind of move through things that come up around the work of healing and working with the Medicine Buddha tradition. So, um, welcome everyone, welcome Greg and EOC, welcome. Um, so yeah, getting back, I just want to talk a little bit as we begin. Also, before I forget, go ahead and put your prayer request in um, as well. So if you have a prayer request, I'd like to offer those at the beginning, or at least know to offer those at the beginning of our practice. Um, but um, as we begin, before we begin the practice, I've been thinking a little bit about Medicine Buddha tradition, and we talk about healing quite a bit in this space. And one of the things that we understand about Medicine Buddha Tantra is that the Medicine Buddha Tantra is really just this tradition of practice that actually derives from centuries, millennia of indigenous healing based practices. Um, that yeah, Medicine Buddha arises from Southeast Asian culture, but the practice of Medicine Buddha, this kind of tradition of healing actually are practices that arise out of multiple indigenous cultures around the world. Um, as we talked about a couple um, a couple of weeks ago now, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we talked about um, how actually it may have been longer, um, uh, much longer ago, but we talked about how we have this idea of a deity, of a god or goddess, a deity, right? And how it's not always and there are different kinds of deities, right? There are wisdom deities and there are worldly deities. Wisdom deities are deities that emerge out of the essence of phenomenal reality itself, right? Um, they emerge out of wisdom itself, right? Worldly deities, on the other hand, are deities that arise. They're beings. The worldly deities are beings like us, right? They're ego centered beings who have accomplished, developed, cultivated a certain level of spiritual power, I would say, abilities, right? And so that has impacted this kind of energetic vibration, right? We all function energetically on these levels of vibration. They function on a higher level of vibration, so they take form in kind of a different plane of existence, right? But they're still ego-based beings like us, so they still have needs and wants, and they can still be petty, and they still have favorites. And I love studying, and I have for a long time, Greek and Roman gods and goddesses, like that whole culture of practice, because it's so. I find that there to be so much truth in the ways in which Roman and Greek gods were just like really like intense and petty and selfish and so forth and so on. Like, and that can definitely reflect in the world of worldly deities. But then on the other hand, there are worldly deities who are very benevolent, very kind, very compassionate, of course. And then there are some that aren't, you know? And for those of us who are coming out of different paths and traditions of practice that are really centered around the worship and practice of deities, we get that. I think we understand that we've been initiated, into Yoruba traditions, Ifa traditions, into Santeria and so forth, right? We get that. We get the the importance of maintaining certain relationships with worldly deities. And of course, when we're initiated into the practice of a tradition of a deity, then there are things that we have to observe, because deities need and want certain things. And that's where that comes out of. Like, it's not that we take commitments to do these like random practices for a deity. The deities actually like certain things, you know, and enjoy certain things, and we offer those things to them, and in exchange, there's benevolence that's offered, and that benevolence, blessings and help, and in all kinds of situations. When we talk about wisdom deities, particularly as we understand them in Tibetan, Vajrayana, Tantric traditions, well, not all tantric deities are wisdom deities either, but in the Tibetan, rather in the, I want to be more general, in the Vajrayana tantric, or the Buddhist tantric, I would say, to get even more specific, the Buddhist tantric side of things, we tend to focus much more on wisdom deities, even though in Tibetan practice and Tibetan culture, there is a really intense practice around local deities, which themselves are worldly deities. But I won't get into that tonight. But what I mean to say here is that in the Buddhist tantric side of things, we're really into the wisdom deities, that arise out of the wisdom itself. It arises out of the essence of reality, and these beings, which we call Buddhas, right? So these Buddhas are they're only benevolent, they're only compassionate, they're only awakened, right? And so this is where medicine Buddha comes out of. However, the point of all of this is to say that yes, we have this practice of medicine Buddha that we're doing, and medicine Buddha is this wisdom deity. We are also tapping into this class of worldly deities who themselves are also aligned with the purpose and the project of medicine Buddha, right? And so these worldly deities will take on the appearance of medicine Buddha to be of benefit as well. And we talked about this in relationship to Tara as well. And the dates for the practice of Tara for June are coming out too. So let me get those together as well. And we can talk about that more in Tara practice. But so worldly deities, benevolent worldly deities, can take on the appearance and take on the work and the labor of medicine Buddha as well. So sometimes we may have experiences with Medicine Buddha, but sometimes those experiences are actually experiences with worldly deities who are taking on the appearance and the work of Medicine Buddha. You know, so I always want to point that out because I think that for those of us who are professional Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, we get really purists. I think that's the form, that's the way in which capitalism and white supremacy has actually impacted the transference of of Buddhist tantra into a Western context. You've taken out the indigeneity, when in fact indigeneity is a really strong part of Vajrayana or Buddhist tantra practice. I know I'm using all these terms. I know some of you are brand new, so it gets confusing. Um, so when we practice the Medicine Buddha, we're actually tapping into the we're tapping into a relationship of local beings, local spirits, local entities that are being called, are choosing to be a part of this awakened project of Medicine Buddha because these worldly deities are themselves still working towards enlightenment as well. Um, and when we look at indigenous cultures around the world, for those of us who come out of indigenous cultures who are familiar with this already, we know that there's already systems of healing. They're already ancient to begin with, right? Um, and that Buddhist Tantra is still very much aligned with indigenous practices around the world, um, too, um, if that makes sense. Um, so the practice of Medicine Buddha means that we are also tapping into, I would say, pantheons of other uh, groups of deities, I would say. Um, early on in my practice of Tara, for instance, I began to understand that Tara was actually expressed, as the Mother Mary, as Mary Magdalene. Tara was being expressed, you know, um, in, as Oshun, right? And these are just the deities that I'm connected to, right? But this awakened feminine divine is expressed, in Kali and all the Mahavidyas and the mothers of within the Vedic tradition, in the Catholic Church, right? And not to say that, for instance, Tara is Oshun or that Oshun is Tara. It's just that this awakened consciousness is just taking form based on the culture that this is arising in, right? Be it in Africa or be it in Tibet, or Australia, or what have you, or Europe too, you know. Ostara, for instance, who I feel very connected to, Ostara, the goddess of spring, like Easter, the goddess of Easter, right? It was for those of us who grew up Christian, you know, and we have Easter, we think we're celebrating Jesus and the resurrection. We're actually practicing an ancient pagan ritual associated with the goddess of the spring, Ostara. So, of course, we can study, like the Romans and their entrance into, the British Isles and how, the Romans absorbed these pagan rituals, and then Christianity sprung up, and so these pagan rituals were just, you know, reorganized as Christian rituals, and you can study that. That's not been my focus in my academic study. That's not necessarily been my main academic focus, but there are people who study that really exclusively. You can read some of their work around that. So, so I say all that to say that some of the things that we practice isn't so exclusive to what to the tradition that we're practicing. That these traditions are all the world of the divine, the world of the sacred is less segmented, divided than we like to believe. Um, right. And that also, on top of that, we want to add these karmic connections that we've established over many lifetimes to different deities and to different beings that ripen over and over again in so many different ways, in one life, you know. Um, that's why some of us love, you know, some of us love Kali and the Mother Mary, for instance, like Mary, right? How do we love Kali and Mother Mary? Well, one, they're probably the expression of the same essence, and secondly, um, we've developed these practices over many lifetimes. You know, um, so, but getting back, um, really to medicine Buddha, so we're focusing on healing, we're focusing, on awakening this capacity for balance, because this is what we're really talking about, balance, right? We're talking about balance. We're going to talk about medicine Buddha, and we're moving into chanting and visualizations, and in other cases we're doing movement um, to awaken, this innate balance for all of us, right? For not just for us, but the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is inherently in balance, but our relationship to the phenomenal world is not in balance. You know, so we're not trying to fix the phenomenal world. We're trying to actually fix our relationship to the phenomenal world. And that's what we're trying to do in our practice. In terms of Buddhist tantra, the phenomenal world it's perfect, like because the essence of the phenomenal world is already it's emptiness, it's space, it's already awakened, right? There's nothing to fix in terms of the phenomenal world. What we're trying to fix is our view of the phenomenal world, which is essentially saying we're trying to fix our relationship to the phenomenal world, right? It's our perception that we're trying to cleanse, to bring into balance, to awaken. Right? And the because of delusion, which is delusion is the opposite of wisdom and clarity, so we have this delusion that actually prevents us from seeing the actuality of the phenomenal world, you know. And delusion means that for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, we're actually not seeing the complete expression of the phenomenal world. We're only experiencing what our senses experiences, right? We're only hearing what we hear. We're only seeing what we actually see. We're only touching what we can actually touch. But when wisdom starts to awaken and develop, we begin to see composite reality as it is. Composite means that there are multiple, countless realities happening at once in this one moment, right? I don't, I think you have to be completely awakened to see everything, but, as we're developing deeper and deeper clarity, we're beginning to see the multiple realities happening at once, right? you know. And I think also what happens is this. I think the ultimate. I think a very common awakening that people go through is the awakening of beginning to see the world of the the world of the living and the world of the spirit of the dead, right? Even the spirit world, the bardo has multiple dimensions as well. So some of us are able just to see like maybe one aspect of the spirit world, but there are many aspects of the spirit world. They're like, I guess a way to see it is like levels, right? Or what's a different way to say it? It's like, I mean, it's literally just like in this time and space, in this moment, there are countless things happening. And we're developing the capacity to be in relationship to as many of those realities as possible, right? An awakening means that we begin to see the totality of everything, right? Which is all just a delusion. It's all just this illusion. It's a dream. This is just a dream that's happening, right? But as our awareness deepens, we begin to see the multiple folds of the dream, right? Until you're like shoved out of the dream, you know. I think maybe it gets to this point where just everything gets so overwhelming that you just get shoved out of it. You overwhelm the program, right? Because we are trapped in samsara, which is samsara is just delusion. We get trapped in delusion because our perception is too simple. Like it's so simple, it's not complex. It's very simple. Simplicity and hyper simplicity keeps us trapped in samsara, keeps us trapped in delusion. Complexity begins to disrupt delusion because delusion, well, samsara itself, it's hard for samsara to withstand complexity. Um, so, and what does that mean? So, what does it mean that samsara doesn't withstand complexity? It means when you start questioning reality itself, and you begin to say, "Well, I think there's much more happening than what I'm sensing, than what I'm seeing or hearing or tasting, and so forth." We understand in the sutras that our senses are lying to us to begin with. You know, so the sensory world is actually lying to us, right? It doesn't have to be this brutal, violent lie if we can just say, "Oh, like there's much more happening," you know, you know. It doesn't. This is not about becoming a conspiracy theorist, because I think that's an easy place for us to go is to say, well, everything is, nothing's true. Well, yes, yeah. I mean, yes, there is a basic untruthfulness to everything. It doesn't mean that we get lost in that either, you know. Um, I keep coming back to Lauren Hill, right? I keep coming back to Lauren Hill. I keep thinking, okay, everything is everything, you know. Everything is everything. I think that's such a profound lyric. I mean, that whole album, the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I just think there's just like, I think she was channeling, she was, she was channeling, wasn't, you know, um, she was channeling a lot, but I just, everything is such an extremely important, complex teaching. Everything is everything, Um, I guess another thing that I'm trying to say in all of this is, I guess what I'm really trying to say is that for so many of us, we're getting tricked by the phenomenal world. We're being really tricked. We're being taken advantage of by what we perceive as real. And I'm talking specifically about trauma. Actually, we're believing the trauma way too much. The trauma, there's a truth and a dharma to trauma that takes practice to be in relationship with. Um, and it's easy for us to get caught, but to bite the hook and to say, well, the trauma, that when we bite the hook, the world becomes our trauma. The world is just a mirror of our trauma, and then you're lost in it. That's how samsara gets you. Samsara really gets you when you get lost in that. Some of you think that you're making these really liberated choices. Actually, you're just responding. You're just no, you're just reacting to the trauma, thinking that it's a skillful, wise response to it, but you're actually just reacting. You know, and to get to a place where you're in a relationship to the world, not from a place of trauma, but from a place of the space around the trauma. That's what we're trying to get to. You know, we're not in a relationship with each other. We're in a relationship with each other's trauma. Just to be quite honest, we're in a relationship to each other's trauma. We're organizing around our trauma. We're creating communities around trauma, right? You know, we're letting our trauma like guide us into, well, we're letting the trauma tell us about freedom. And this is where this is so tricky. This is such, on one hand, such an overwhelming project. Liberation is such an overwhelming project on one hand because it's so, like, it's easy to get pulled into the weeds of trauma, and we have to keep pulling back the layers, layer after layer, layer after layer. And and for me, you know, I've been able to do so much around my own healing with trauma because I've been able to move into the formless itself, to move into the emptiness itself. You know, And that's why I've always been drawn to it. At the very beginning of practice, even though I didn't understand any of this, I have always been drawn. I've always hungered for the formless, to be in the formless, you know. And when you're able to touch into the formless, of course, you have to come back because we're still in the body and the relative. But you bring back the wisdom back into the relative, and you say, "Oh, there's this whole other thing that's happening that isn't about the chaos of the relative." And this is why Buddhist tantric deity practice is so incredibly profound and radical, because as we talked about last week, the deity arises to take us from the relative to the ultimates. You know, the deity arises between this big gap between the relative, the world of form, and the world of the formless. And the deity arises within this space, and offers the deity actually just becomes a bridge that takes us into the formless. But to step on that bridge of the deity, you have to develop the trust. And that's where most of you are really, that's where most of you're stuck, as I was. As I was at one point in my life. You're stuck at the trust. Most of you aren't, most of you don't have the capacity to step off the edge yet and know that you're going to get caught. You know, you're not trusting the practice, and it's not about it's we're talking about the deity, but it's just about practice in general. You're not trusting the practice enough, and you're not trusting yourself enough, and so therefore you get stuck and cycled in the trauma. Then trauma catches you because you don't have the audacity to do something different. This is why this is why I do what I do. This is why you know I teach the way that I teach, because I'm trying to help people develop the trust in themselves and in the practice. Because that's what has saved my life, and that's what has helped me to experience the freedom that I experience. Right? It's the trust, and it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be confusing. You know, right? And some of us don't. Another thing that many of us experience is that we don't know what it really feels like to be cared for by anything. By people, by ourselves, by the deity. Like, you don't know what care feels like, and so you don't trust that you're going to be cared for if you take a risk as well. And I can talk all day long about this, and I can offer every practice that I know to offer, but all this is just like bullshit, you know, if we don't take the risks. Like, we have to risk. Tantra isn't a safe path of practice. It's not about safety. You're not. I hope you're not doing this because you want to feel safe. Because you're not. All that's going to get, the rug is going to keep being pulled from under you. This is not about being safe. It's about taking risks. Like, if you want to get free, you have to take risks. You know. Like, this is where my ancestors come back, right? My ancestors, you know, took risk after risk. risk after risk to get free. They took risk after risk so I could be born into this time, into this body, and have what I have to continue. Abolition work, like the spiritual abolition, it's like we're trying to transcend all the experience of bondage and incarceration and policing. And this level of spiritual policing, it's where we're policing ourselves. You know, we can blame we can blame samsara all we want to, but what we know in Buddha Dharma is that like we have a choice. Like we have to choose to be free. We have to consent to the freedom to get free. And again, most of you haven't consented to be free because you're really like you're cool with staying stuck because it's what you know and feels comfortable. You know. You know, and it takes time. This is time. You know, this is time. It takes practice. It's steady work, right? But the other really profound thing about tantric practice is that everything is trying to teach you to get free. It's about changing our perspective. It's like the trauma is actually teaching us to get free. If we can just stop reacting to it and start responding to trauma, then you begin to say, oh, the trauma is just another teacher. The fear is just another teacher. If I can just stop reacting to it, habitually just overreacting, and I started holding space for it and responding to it, the fear is like, oh, this is how to get free. The fear is actually pointing us to freedom. And you know, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding too about going deeper into something. You know, you go deeper, it's the reactivity. You all have to get that. You know, like you have to understand that you won't get anywhere until you understand what reactivity is. Going deeper into something doesn't mean we react more to it. Going deeper into something that means that you allow it to happen. It's just there. It's just there, and you feel it. The trauma isn't the problem; it's our reactivity to the trauma is the problem, right? And that's the grand one of the grand teachings of Buddhist Tantra is that the world isn't the problem. It's our relationship to the world that's the problem. You know, if you want to change the world, you have to change your relationship to the world. You know, we talk about going deep into something. You're already deep in it. You know, like I don't want to go deep into the trauma. You're already deep in the trauma right now. You're like you are drowning in the trauma. You're drowning in the grief. You're drowning in the self hate. You're drowning in all of this right now. You know, so you're talking about not going deep. You're already deep. You know, you're already there. You know, therefore, what we're really talking about is reactivity to the depth that we're in. We're just talking about the reactivity. And to know that a majority of people they don't even know that they're in what they're in. You know, they don't even know that they're in what they're in. Most of you don't even know that you're in what you're in. people, people come, they roll up to me in various forums and different ways, and they're just like, Lama Rod, you're this, and that. Yeah, I've gotten everything. I've gotten, Lama Rod, you're apathetic. That was apathy was what apathy and what was it? Distant, disconnected is what I've gotten my whole life. That was like, you know, you know, people would be like, "Oh, Rod, you're just like you're so apathetic. Like you're not." And I just really struggled with that feedback because I didn't, I felt like I cared about everything. It was such a strange thing to get that feedback from people. It's like you're just, people are like, "Well, Rod, you're just disconnected," and I'm like, I feel everything. I am feeling everything. So I never understood that feedback, right? you know and then over time I realized that, oh, I had this natural capacity coming into this life to hold space for everything. I just didn't know that. I didn't understand that, and it was always misread by people. It was also misread because I didn't actually understand how to hold that, or how to like embody that in a way that helped people to understand that I was actually super connected and super in tune. And then then more recently, it's been all kinds of stuff. And people will, I'll just tell you this, people will, if you're not coming from a place of trauma, people will not trust you. You will be misunderstood because everyone else is responding, or sorry, everyone else is reacting from a place of trauma. And when you're choosing not to do that anymore, then you will be misunderstood. You will be misread. You will be considered a threat. You will be asked to leave places if you can't get with the reaction to trauma because everyone else is doing it. And somehow we've equated solidarity with oppressed communities. We've equated solidarity with oppressed communities with reactivity to trauma, right? And that kind of false equivalency actually perpetuates the experience of oppression. Like it continues to create the conditions for oppression for us to continue to identify with. Because we don't actually know how to identify with something outside or beyond trauma. Because some of us are just organizing spaces around trauma, and I don't show up for that anymore because I'm choosing to be free. you know, I'm choosing the space instead of the trauma right now. And if you make that choice, you will be misread. You will be misunderstood. I don't choose that because, oh, I just woke up one day and said, oh, I want to be trauma free. I choose that because I've busted my fucking ass to get here. I've busted it to get here. You know, I've done the practices. I've prayed to the gods. I've drank the medicine, right? I've been to the jungle. I've been to the mountaintop. I've been with the shamans. I've been with the lamas. I've been with the priests. I've been in the other worlds. I've been with the ancestors, right? I've been with the descendants, right? I've been with the earth, you know. I've made deals with beings, I've loved my teachers, you know. I loved my teachers. I've loved the teachings. I've loved the Dharma, and I have given up a lot. A lot. You don't get sacrifice. The sacrifices I've made, I've given up a lot. And not even knowing, I've given up things that I had no idea that, I had no clue that if I could ever get back again. I gave up my family. I gave up my name. I gave up everything that I owned. I gave up, money and material resources is the least of what I've given up in life to get here. I've given up relationships. I've given up years of my life. I've joined cults. And and it's about how serious are you? How serious are you? Because I'm real serious. I am real serious about this. I am very clear about the brutality of samsara. I'm very clear about that. I don't need to be reminded about how sinister samsara is. I get it. And therefore, I'm getting the hell out of here. But you have to start somewhere. So you have to start somewhere. You just can't do all this at once. You have to start somewhere. And just letting our hearts break is a really good start. It's a real good start to this path. It's just letting your heart break and letting your heart be held by sources of refuge, by the earth, by the ancestors, by the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, deities, whomever it is, by your loved ones, by your friends, by your sangha, your whomever. Letting your heart break. And so many of you are just resisting. You're just resisting. You're resisting. You're resisting. You're just pushing away. You can't. Some of you are so pissed off, so angry, so enraged. You know, and you'll never get under that rage until the heart breaks, and until you let that broken heart be cared for. This is all. This is all so. It's so complicated. So, it's so complicated. It's so complex. It's so much. And what I can tell you is that the Dharma arises as you need it, right? So you're working with the teaching that's right in front of you first. This is it. You work with this. and then you metabolize it, then you go to the next one. So I want to we're going to obviously go over a couple of minutes tonight, but I want to do a simpler practice tonight. We need to feel movement. We need to feel flow. We're stuck, like we're feeling stuck. And to feel unstuck, we call in the energy of movement, of fluidity. We call in the element of water, really water and air, right? These moving, purifying. So to begin with, um, above, just bringing attention to just the space above your head. We're just going to do a brief visualization here. And then we're going to do some mantra, right? But above your head, I invite you to begin to imagine an expression of the healer, of Medicine Buddha, above your head. Now you can imagine Medicine Buddha above your head. Medicine Buddha, in the iconography that we have. Um, if you don't know what Medicine Buddha looks like, you can just do a quick search online. So even imagine just Medicine Buddha above your head. But as we practice in the space, when we think about the healer, who is the healer for us? This archetypal healer. Who is the healer? What is the healer? And can we imagine this expression of the healer above our head? It can be our teachers, right? It can be guides. It can be our ancestors. It could be any other Buddha, or whomever, any other deity. But that teacher or that being, the healer, emerges above our heads. And we imagine that this healer is responding empathetically to our suffering, to our confusion, our trauma, our grief, our confusion, our sorrow, and our sadness. And they care. And that energy of care, which is deep compassion, right? That deep compassion begins to fill their bodies or their expressions up with this warm white light. It's like they're these little moons, these moons above our heads radiating this intense white light. And this white light is the energy of their compassion, their caring for us. And sometimes what's helpful in this practice is to think about a time in your life where someone just really visibly embodied care for us. Maybe at that time someone sat and cried with us when we were lost in our sorrow, or that gesture of compassion that someone offered us. Thinking about those experiences, because that is the energy and the radiance that's beginning to radiate above our heads from this healer, from this expression of medicine Buddha above our heads. And slowly this light, this energy of compassion, of caring, begins to flow like, like a very slow moving waterfall from the healer above our heads into the crown of our heads. This energy begins to move through and down into our bodies. We imagine that this flow of energy begins to cleanse, to purify, to wash away the fear, the trepidation, the trauma, the anger, the sadness. It begins to flow through the body and out the bottom of our bodies, maybe out of our feet or out of the tailbone, the base of the spine, and that this energy is collected by the earth under us. So this cycle from healer into our bodies and down into the earth. And feeling that stream of energy, that stream of fluid energy just moving, flooding through the body, taking away everything that we're struggling with, trusting it to take care of us in this moment. And as we continue to move through that visualization, we will begin our mantra practice. 우체아차움 백은세 마 백은세 라스수문가 테소아 제야차움 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 백은세 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 백은세 마 백은세 라서 숨은 가리 소와 제야자온 백은세 Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. Teata Begense, Begense, Ma Begense, lass es umangare soa. 제야다운 베겐세 베겐세 마베겐세 라서 숨은 가리 좋아 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 제야다운 베겐세 베겐세 마베겐세 라서 숨은 가리 좋아. Returning our attention to the healer above our heads, thanking the healer for their blessing, their love and care. Imagine that they dissolve into white light, and that white light is dissolved down into our bodies, and dissolves specifically into our heart centers. And we're going to do 3 internalized exhales. So that means that we're going to breathe deeply into the heart center, hold the breath for a period, And then imagine that we release the breath into the body so that inhale or the exhale just begins to just permeate throughout the body. And this is a way that we're going to get this energy, this awakened blessing of Medicine Buddha just really deeply infused into our physical, both our physical bodies and our energetic, subtle energy bodies. Okay, so we're going to begin. Inhale deeply into the heart center, holding. Then releasing inside the body. And do it twice more, moving at your own pace. When you're ready, coming back to a normal, settled breath. We want to thank the earth for supporting us. Thank the seat for holding us. Thank our bodies for being a vessel for practice. Thank our breath for sustaining us. Thank our minds for being awakened. We thank our teachers, guides, elders, and gurus for their teachings. We thank this community that's gathered electronically, virtually, to support one another in practice. We dedicate the liberatory energy, awareness, clarity to all those we've offered up in prayer tonight. And then we conclude by reciting our Shantideva's prayer 3 times together. So that's coming up in the chat box. So we begin. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine. And may I be the nurse for all the sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach unto the ends of space. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all the sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. And lastly, may I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all the sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. Thank you all so much for your practice today. This is one question in the chat that I want to answer. I'm totally uninitiated in the spiritual trauma work. Yeah, yeah, spiritual trauma work. Yeah, it's hard to articulate, if there is anything that we can be initiated into. But in any case, I think this is new for all of us. So I probably got this totally wrong. I was sexually assaulted when I was younger. Are you saying that my relationship to the trauma is the problem? My reactivity to that? Sorry, just trying to wrap my head around this. Yeah, so much of what we're trying to do with any trauma that we're working with, is to give the trauma space. You can't give trauma space as we're reacting to it. But the reactivity is such a deeply ingrained experience that takes a lot of work, a lot of different modalities, a lot of different paths. Well, I wouldn't say paths, but modalities. It takes each of us actually figuring out the combination of practices that work best for us. If it's somatic work, if it's therapy, if it's spiritual practices, if it's plant medicine, um, whatever it may be, I think that's something we all have to kind of figure out on our own. Um, yeah, this relationship. This is in Buddhist practice. If we're talking exclusively about Buddhist practice, which is what I'm deeply informed by, it's not the thing itself; it's our relationship to the thing. You know, that's where we're coming from with this work. So what's happening in the relationship that I can bring awareness to and liberation to? Okay, so I hope that's helpful um, for everyone. And so we'll see you again on Monday. I will be offering the Wednesday night talk for Boomy Spasha, so come and join us. You'll get the more of the same. You're gonna get a very similar rant on Wednesday because this is what's on my mind right now. Um, and stay tuned. I am working on um, more resources. So as I am moving through my own the thing, so the thing, that's always important to understand is that I am also working through my practice as well as teaching and as well as supporting others. And I'm working through my own interpersonal issues and relationships in my body and sickness and death and dying, all of that. I am working as well as trying to support others and working with that on their own. So this is the labor that I'm doing for myself, and sometimes I can't always be present, because it's a lot to be present for. So I continue to ask for prayers for myself and my practice, as I try to be more available and accessible, to everyone. Okay, so that's it, and hopefully I'll see you Wednesday night. Um, all right, I'll see you all later. Okay, bye everyone.